Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. If I could have your attention, please. I really wish I were shorter right now. This would be a lot easier. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Brad Henderson, and I have the incredible pleasure of being the board chair of this wonderful organization, Interfaith Youth Corps.
And I'm Amber Hacker, Vice President of Operations and Communications at Interfaith Youth Corps, and I wish to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, IFYC supporters, partners, new friends, IFYC alumni, and board members. Welcome to the Fall Interfaith Forum.
And so we have a real treat in store today. So I'm so grateful that Shundrawn Thomas, the president of Northern Trust Asset Management Business, is here with us today. So I personally have gotten to know Shundrawn over the years, and if one of the key themes of Interfaith Youth Corps is being in dialogue with one another, I can say very sincerely that there are very few people I know who are better to be in dialogue with. And I say that in a couple of ways. The first is, when I think about Shundrawn, and I just think about what it's like to have a conversation, a very serious conversation with somebody, his ability to truly listen and take in our work, the work that he does on a day-to-day basis at Northern Trust. Usually people with the kind of ideas that he has spend more time telling them than listening to them. But he has this rare gift for really bringing the best from the room into how he thinks about things. But when I pile on that, the way that he just thinks about his faith, his role in this community, his role as a family member, and critically important, his role as a leader at Northern Trust. I had the distinct pleasure of actually working with him in the business world in addition to the personal world. And I can tell you, having spent 20 years in business, there are very few people I've met with the degree of integrity and thought that Shundrawn has. And so I just think it's a real treat to hear somebody from that world, the world of commerce and building the wealth and asset management industry around the United States, to have the kind of reflections that he shared in his book that we get to listen to today. It is a real honor to have him. So thank you for coming.
And while Eboo does not need an introduction for many of you, I will just add that I have had the privilege of working alongside Eboo for the past 10 years at Interfaith Youth Corps. And as you may know, we are dedicated to advancing interfaith cooperation through and beyond higher education. And as I've thought about today's conversation and Shundrawn's book, I feel blessed to find joy in my work on a daily basis. And one of the things I really value most about working at IFYC is that I'm able to be open about my own evangelical Christianity and build genuine friendships across the faith spectrum with my colleagues. I'm lucky to count Eboo as one of those colleagues and friends, and our work together has given me many opportunities to admire and be inspired by his Muslim commitments. Dialogue, relationships across difference, appreciative knowledge, that's really at the heart of what we do at Interfaith Youth Corps, and that's at the heart of the conversation we are about to be treated to between Eboo and Shundrawn. Please join me in welcoming Shundrawn Thomas and Eboo Patel.
I love these fall interfaith forums. One of the best days of the year. We have a terrific room of people. We have IFYC board members. We have IFYC staff who's worked for a long time to put together this event. Thank you to all of you who's done all that hard work. We have my camp counselor from my YMCA days when I was in 6th grade who comes, Linda Dean. Thank you for doing that. We have college and foundation presidents. We have senior corporate executives. We have, she didn't know I was going to call her out, but Alana, a student at the Boot School here at the University of Chicago, who comes up to me and says, we are the only ethics content for the business school, the conference that we run. Do you think you could recommend a speaker to me? And I'm like, if you throw a dart in any direction in this room, you will find a speaker for your conference. I'm really proud that InterVarsity reached out to you and that you're here and that all of you are here. So thank you so much. what a University of Chicago thing to have right when you exit the elevator, all of the pictures of their Nobel prize winners, right? A U.S. president, probably a Supreme Court justice or two. If you're a mortal like me, you're like, man, that is daunting. If you're Shundrawn, you're like, these cats got nothing on me, right? Shundrawn, who you are is, the most important thing is that you're a child of God and you know that, and that you are a wonderful friend and neighbor. And you're also somebody who has written 4 books, who runs a major part of Northern Trust's business, who plays a really important role in a church, and who is a great dad. So I have so enjoyed becoming friends with you over the past couple of years. I'm so looking forward to this conversation, and I love this book. I love this book. I love the story it starts with, where you say that you are part of this group of senior corporate executives, senior nonprofit executives, and each of you, in the course of introducing yourselves and getting to know one another, you had to kind of do a presentation. And the last person to present asks the question to the group, are you happy? And there's kind of a stony silence in the room, right? And your book jumps off from that story. A group of powerful, influential people, all presenting to themselves the way, in some ways, you normally would. And the last one saying, are you happy? And that's the pin drop moment. And you introduce your themes at that point, right? You say, this is going to be a book about work, joy, and transformation. So I'd love for you to unpack that story and how it leads into those themes. And the one thing I want to say right before you begin is, you say up front, you're not talking about jobs. You're not talking about what it means to have a job. You're talking about what we're meant to do in our world, and the word you give to that is work.
Well, first of all, good afternoon. It's delightful to be here with new friends and old friends. And one of the wonderful things that you get to experience, that one of those 12 individuals is actually here, so he'll know the story really well. But the impetus for the book, I think it's a question. Not only do we ask ourselves, I don't think it's a question that you ask yourself at a singular time. It is a question, I believe, for all of us that actually do work outside, inside the home, vocationally, avocationally. Whether we're asking ourselves it explicitly or not, we're asking the question, but I think our practical reality is often it's pushed to or it fades to the background. And I think the important thing, I don't think things happen in your lives by chance. I think there are instances of grace we all experience, and sometimes it can be as simple as a question being posed at the right time, in the right season, in the right moment, that makes you evaluate things in a certain way. It's almost like, for me, God's way of maybe just nudging you in a little direction that you need to think about. For me, the question had been there powerfully and personally as I think about finding meaningfulness in my own work. But one of the things that literally was sitting with me at that time is, in the role that I have, and increasingly when you're responsible for managing, say, large businesses or things like that, you spend lots of time with people, working with them on their professional and personal development. And here was the truth of my experience in talking to people. Oftentimes they would come in and it was the proverbial career conversation. They talk about some job they might want to take next. But when you get to the truth, an astounding percentage of those people would share with me transparently how literally discouraged they were about their work. I would go as far as to say the majority of people that I actually talked to around that topic, when you got to the truth, they were so unhappy with their job. Now, from the outside, you look incredibly successful, very talented, and so there was just this huge disconnect for me. I was like, how can we actually spend all our waking hours in this kind of activity that apparently brings people so little joy? So that gets to the 3 words that the book is built around. The first is work, right? And we understand what that means. It's like physical or mental activity that we put towards achieving some intended outcome, right? There's joy, and you think of that as like deep pleasure, something that really gives you a feeling of not quite ecstasy, right? But certainly something that makes you, gives you happiness, like that question, are you happy? The third word is transform. And really what I begin to think about is that there are things that we have to transform in terms of the way that we think. And so, at least for me, as I thought more about that question that we were being asked, I really landed on three fundamental truths. I think work is actually intended, not only to be meaningful, right, but we're intended to flourish in our work environment in whatever we do. I think work is also intended to be joyful. But I actually think for us to experience that, we actually have to transform our mindset of the way that we think. And the way that the book is built is like three areas in terms of thinking about where you have to transform your mindset. The first is the workplace, right? The community in which we work or the environment in which we work in, starting with our view of that. The second is work ethic. This just deep belief that work, beyond just working in the sense for earning a living, that work has inherent value to build character, to do things beyond what we simply get paid to do. And then the last part is thinking about what I call our work life and understanding that you're on a journey over the course of the career. It's not about any individual quote unquote job or assignment, but what you're trying to accomplish over the course of a career.
And along that journey, a central theme of the book is the role faith, spirituality, and meaning plays in that, right? So here's a line that I pulled out. We are all divinely created, imbued with power and purpose, right? You don't hide this. This is not a subtext of the book. This is who you are, and it's front and center in this book. And as I'm reading this, we like to talk at IFYC that we are we're an organization, and we want to be a part of a conversation that people from atheists to Zoroastrians feel comfortable in, right? Richard Rorty, the philosopher, who's actually a relative of my friend and new colleague, the Reverend Paul Rauschenbusch, he famously called religion a conversation stopper. It's not a conversation stopper in this book. It's an invitation. It feels very inviting. Your faith is present, the particularity of it, and the manner in which you present themes of faith, spirituality, and meaning feels like an invitation. So I don't have a better way to ask this, but how did you pull it off, right? How did you pull off making faith, spirituality, meaning in your own particular manner of understanding that feel inviting rather than a conversation stopper?
Well, I think the first thing is this. When you're writing a book, you sit back and think, and they'll say, well, who's your audience? And so if you were to open up the book and you see the dedication, I explicitly say, I'm writing the book to the working world. Right? That's the audience. There's no qualifier that says it has to be a person of a certain political belief or a certain faith orientation or so if I start with that is actually the audience, I actually feel comfortable speaking to that audience. The second thing I realize is, our founding fathers said truth is self-evident. I actually do think truth is self-evident. And I think people respond to truth. I think sometimes we can run people away from truth because we shroud truth in our own opinions. We shroud truth, right, in our presentation of it. But if we just speak truth, I think it resonates with people. The third thing is, I actually think people at our core, we value people that are transparent. So I can choose to present a facade, right? And if in fact, my faith and my value, I have 7 clear articulated values at the top of my list is faith. Now, anybody who spends 5 minutes with me would know that, right? And so how could I be authentic, right, if I talked about things that were important to me, but edited out that part of my value system or my belief system? I think the reality is it actually would come across as inauthentic. And I think when you can both be authentic in what you believe and what you value, but this is just as importantly, and be receptive and give space for people to be authentic in what they believe and what they value, there is a true conversation that can take place. The problem is there's so much in society today that tells us that we can't do that. And so I think we spend so much time self-editing that it removes the opportunity to have those genuine dialogues.
And this is the theme that by which Brad introduced you, right? Which is you as kind of a model of somebody in dialogue, somebody who is speaking truth, and somebody who is welcoming of other people's conversation. So this book is addressed to the two sides of the working world. One is, who are you as somebody who has a vocation? And the other is to people who run organizations and companies. You actually, at the top, quote a bunch of Gallup data, which says many employees aren't engaged, and in part that means organizations and companies aren't being the best that they can be. And then you have this great line. You say, job satisfaction is too low a bar for how we spend most of our waking hours, right? Sure. And job satisfaction is too low a bar for how an organization ought to think about engaging the vocations and talents of the people who are part of that organization. So why is it important for organizations and companies to be welcoming of this faith, spirituality, God, and meaning conversation? And let me say that, we do most of our work on college campuses at IFYC, but 2 or 3 times a year I'll wind up speaking to a company because of some invitation. And it is striking to me how open companies are to identity-based groups when it comes to race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. I think it's a terrific thing. There's an Asian and Pacific Islanders group at Allstate, for example. But the number of companies that actively bar, that do not allow faith-based groups is striking. Most companies, in my experience, don't. And you're saying in this book, if you're not open to how people find meaning in their lives, you're not being the organization you can be because your employees aren't engaged.
So I think there are a couple of things there. So I think about, like, in my work, when I think about whether it's the vision we have set for our business, whether it's at the corporate level or the business unit level, I think of individual groups. I like to say, more than not, to achieve those things, we need people to give to us more effort than we could ever pay for. We do. You literally cannot pay people to deliver the kind of outcome that you need. And so if that is true, how do I convince someone, right, that either gets paid a wage or a salary to provide, right, more service than they get paid for? It has to be that the work itself, inclusive of the work experience, has to be personally meaningful to them. It has to be, right? And if that's the case, how do I accomplish creating an environment and a set of experiences that is meaningful to the person when part of what we're effectively saying is, when you arrive at work, pack part of whoever you are in your proverbial trunk, right? And so work at its best, we all know when we do our best work. And our work in some forms is an expression of ourselves. And so done well, work looks like that. Done well, work says, yes, we have this collective outcome, but you're free to bring the best of who you are to helping us create that outcome. Work done well says, we actually really do believe in diverse perspectives. And I would say, as an editorial comment, I think the fact that we say that companies are open to things like ethnic diversity and racial diversity, I think we have things that mouth that or suggest that, but I don't think it's actually really true. Because in the same companies, we press people to assimilate to social norms that are inconsistent with those very identities that they bring to work. So I think we do that for all kinds of reasons, to not get sued and other things, but not because we're actually saying that we care that you show up that way. And so I think part of the discussion has to be, right, how do we change that? And the major way you influence any culture is really simple. It's the dialogue. I don't have to I don't have to guess what a culture is like. If I can come and spend a day at a place and listen to the dialogue, I have a great sense of what that place is like. And so the nature of the dialogue that we have, to your point, if we can dialogue around issues that sometimes have been seen as being our greatest divide, but if we can transparently dialogue around it, we actually come together. We no longer become a collection of strangers, right? We actually begin to respect and appreciate each other. We begin to get the things out of the workplace that are actually unique to the workplace.
So I'm going to unabashedly ask for some advice. And I'm going to do it on behalf of both IFYC, but also the organizations we work with, which is college campuses, right? So you are offering counsel to companies on how to engage their employees through the way that they find meaning. The senior college administrators in this room accepted from this. You know, we've got people here from Trinity Christian College and Wheaton and Dominican University. Our board member, President Donna Carroll, is here, and North Park University. They get this, right? But there's a whole set of senior college administrators who are like, on questions of religious identity and diversity, students can do what they need to do. It's not something that we are going to proactively encourage on this campus, right? And there's some, like, we think that this is in conflict with science and education. There's some, we think that they're gonna be in conflict with each other if we encourage this. But what advice would you give to a senior college administrator about why they should be leaders in the conversation about religious identity, diversity, faith, meaning spirituality, as opposed to people who say, we're going to try to sideline this as much as possible?
Right. Well, so one, maybe I'd start with a question, maybe a quick show of hands, like for how many people went to some undergraduate university, right? And during that time, how many of those same people would say that was an important time in your personal growth in life and finding yourself, right? Well, if we really do believe that, then the answer to this question gets simple for me, right? Because what happens is, you know, there's a certain part of our lives, one might say, that we're under like mini tutors. And as we grow, we're growing towards independence and actually the greater maturity, which is interdependence, right? But we have to be able to find ourselves in that narrative. And what better time of life or better place that when you're growing, in a sense, academically and you're growing socially, to explore these matters of the soul and the heart. And I think that we miss huge opportunities. Like, we impress upon young people the importance of being able to find a well-paying job when they get out of their undergraduate institutions, but very few of them provide them with any skills to help develop their self-awareness, to understand what things that they are naturally inclined towards, right? We send people, if you think about it, most people actually live in environments that are monolithic. So the place that even people here will go home to in their immediate community, people are going to be of the same racial background, the same socioeconomic background, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what's interesting is the workplace is one of the only places that most people come to that's actually diverse in a lot of different measures. And we say we're preparing you to go into that workplace where people will come from different ethnic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, but we will never have you ever engage in a conversation that helps prepare you to be effective in that environment. And effective not just in the sense of being successful from a career standpoint, but actually to be a good citizen, to actually engage with and care about people you work with. I would pose the question to the college, if you look at their mission statements, how would it be inconsistent with what we propose to be that mission? And so that's the place that I would start. So it would be intentional. I think in many colleges will have programs where they're introducing kids to the college environment. It's a great place to integrate some of these things, to help them to be able to articulate who they are. And as part of who they are, if a big part of who they are is a profession of their faith, give life to that. It will help them not only in their own self-identity, but it will help them as they grow in their social maturity.
This is why you exist, right? You exist to help students find their vocation, which is in part about how they make sense and meaning of the world and how they're going to give that through their work to that world. So you and I both have two sons, which means we are practicing the giving of advice, both in our own ways, raising our sons in faith traditions. So what advice would you have for a graduating senior who, let's say that individual went to a Dominican university, and I mean a college senior, right? Or went to a Wheaton College or a North Park where they were part of a robust faith or interfaith life. They were part of an intervarsity, they were part of a Muslim Students Association, and now they're entering the work world, and they have heard that the one thing you don't talk about when you get to Northern Trust or when you get to working at wherever it is you might be, the Art Institute or the Sierra Club or wherever you might be working, you don't talk about your faith identity, even though over the course of college you got lucky and you were able to nurture that in college. What advice would you have for that for that young person making their way in the world?
Well, the first observation I would have for them is I say, I'm sure you've had a great experience and you've thus far lived a wonderfully sheltered life. No. And it's okay.
Spoken
it's
as
okay.
a dad. That's
it's okay.
dad card number one.
But what I would say is a couple of things, honestly. I said, so the first thing I would say is you're going into a new environment, right? And that environment has a culture and it has a language, right? So if you were going somewhere and they didn't speak the language, and you didn't speak the language, what's the first thing you do? You'd figure out to learn language. Many of us don't do that. Many of us say, I know this language, and I'm going to speak it whether you know it or not. Okay, well, good luck, right? It's hard to communicate that way. And when I say the language, what I mean is I easily and comfortably talk to people about my faith all the time in the workplace, but I do it in this way. We have a common language. And what I say to people is, I'd like to talk to you about my values. Because values are deeply held beliefs, and if you really want to know me, you can't know me without knowing my values. I also want to tell you, I care about you and I want to know your values. And I tell them up front, my most important value is my faith. And I say that putting no pressure on you. I respect whatever your faith is, and if you don't, declare one. But I at least want you to know that transparently about me. Now, you know what? Interestingly enough, I virtually never have trouble having a conversation with people about my values and being faith at the center of my values. Because what I know and what turns out to be the case is they have values too. They may be very different than mine, but we can have an exchange because we have a common language. I would tell people to go into the place and find a common language. The other thing I would tell people is like our nature as human beings, we just are so judgmental. And so we hear something and we immediately go to a judgment, and we do it about people all the time. And I don't know if anybody has read Malcolm Gladwell's new book, Talking to Strangers. But he says something really powerful. He says, when you meet a stranger, there are two things that you need to be. You need to be careful, and you need to be humble. And our reality is many times we're neither careful nor humble. We just plow into conversations with our predispositions on it. So we're not careful, and it can be dangerous to us and the other person. But more than not being careful, we're not humble. We have decided that we know everything there is to know. We have decided that our belief, our religion, our practice is right. And we have decided consciously or unconsciously many times, I won't listen to or receive from someone else that doesn't share my predisposition, my religion, my practice, the way I choose to find God. But then how much of life's experience, how much truth do we block out by doing so? And the most important thing is, how many relationships do we rob ourselves of? That's what I would tell a person as they were going into the workplace.
Beautiful. Thank you. So my last question before we enter into question and answer is, if I have a favorite chapter of the book, it's towards the end. It's called Work Glorifies God. I love this chapter, right? And one of the things I love about it is that there are two mothers at the center of the chapter. There's your mother and there's Mother Teresa. It's hard to keep a dry eye reading about your relationship with your mom and those drives home. And I'd love if you would just share what you learned from either or both your own mom or Mother Teresa about how work glorifies God.
Well, I'll talk about my mom and maybe in the respective time a brief comment about Mother Teresa. But my mother, and we're incredibly close. So my mother had my older brother when she was 16, and she dropped out of school. And if I pause there, for many people that would create an image or an impression and a judgment. It just would. Because when we hear that word, we have a story we've already told ourselves about that individual, absent understanding or appreciating any circumstance. My mother, in her early 30s, when she was raising us, decided that she wanted to go back and pursue, ultimately, her vocation. So she got her high school diploma, she got her bachelor's, and she went on to get her master's. And she pursued a 25-year career in social work. Now, she could have done many things, but it was part of what she felt called to do. And I remember, and the thing that you're referring to in the book is when I was in high school, and she had just begun, like after all of that schooling, and she was working in a crime-ridden neighborhood. It was very tough. I grew up on the South Side. I thought my neighborhood was tough. The neighborhood she was working in was tougher than my neighborhood. And my job, because my dad was working at a later shift, was to pick my mom up from work. And I'll never forget asking her, I said, you know, I just got to tell you, this seems like a really hard way to earn a living. Like, why would you do this work? And at the time, her work was working with people who were wards of the state. I mean, the kind of stories that sometimes she would share, not the names, but it would literally bring your heart to tears. And she said to me, and I always remembered this, she said, you know, these people are important to God and they're important to me, right? And she would talk about her work, and I just realized she had this such incredible sense of calling and purposefulness in her work. The story in the book sort of reflects the life of who we know as Mother Teresa. At one point in time in life, she was just Agnes, born in Macedonia, goes to a convent in Ireland, winds up in India for 20 years in Calcutta. Later in life, she hears what she calls the calling in the midst of a calling. And she says she is called to serve the poorest of the poor. And she literally walks away from the convent, all she knew and all saved, literally onto the streets to start serving the poor. And that's what she does. She has no money, no strategy, no game plan. Brad, she didn't have BCG or anybody else, right? But what does she do? What she ultimately creates is an organization of over 4,000 missionaries. They have hospices and hospitals and schools and shelters all over the world because she found a calling within the calling. What that tells me is I don't care what kind of work you do, but there is something that has to be transcendent of what you do. The last thing I would say that Mother Teresa says in a quote, and it's a powerful quote, she says, in part, you know, there's always this danger that we can just do the work for the work's sake, right? And all our work is good. If you're building roads, we need roads. If you're an accountant, so it's nothing wrong. But she says that's not enough, right? Just to do the work for the work's sake. She says in her words, but we do it for God, to Christ, and because of that, we do it as beautifully as we can. What I say that to say is that there was a transcendent meaning and purposefulness that she found in her work, and that's why I think she had a deep joy in it. And my encouragement to people all the time, listen, if you're going to work for affirmation, for people to pat you on the back, if you think you'll ever get paid enough or whatever, trust me, you'll always want more. But if you can find what she found, that calling in a calling, that sense that, you know, I use the example of the creation narrative where the creator looks and he looks at work and he just says it's good. Nobody has to write him a memo or anything like that. We know when work is good, but we have to find that to find joy in our work.
I love that. It reminds me of this. My favorite line in Dorothy Day. She says, "Our job is to create spaces where it is easier for people to be good."
Yes.
Right? If you're running an organization, if you're running a company, your job is to create spaces where it is easier for people to be good. Let's go to questions. Thank you so much for who you are and for sharing. So we got maybe 8 or 10 minutes for questions. David, why don't you stand up and introduce yourself?
My name is David Hirsch. Thank you to the two of you. Eboo, I want to follow up on one of the questions you asked because it really touched me. It had to do with not talking about religion in the work environment, and I would just take it one step further. The advice that I got when I was growing up as a young business person was not to talk about religion or politics, right? Stay up the middle. Nobody has to know what you're thinking or believing. It's less controversial. You'll get ahead faster. And I think that's true. I love your message. I can't wait to read your book. And it seems like it would be easier to do what you're talking about in the work environment. How do you translate that to the broader community? And what I mean by that is if you work at the Northern Trust, there's a lot of customers of the Northern Trust. How do you get that same message out to your clients or prospective clients without being confrontational?
So I want to be clear on this point. Expressing how I've approached it and what I encourage people to consider, I don't want to give the impression that there will never be conflict, right? Because as soon as you assert a belief, any belief, there will be somebody on the other side of that belief. So I think to your point, it's a very relevant one, but the question becomes, when the conflict comes, and it will, how do you deal with the conflict? I think many of our issues are not so much the conflict. I think it's two things. I think it's one, we're conflict averse. So please take it in the spirit I mean it. Most people run from a battle that they've never been in. And so now I have no tools, I have no skills, I have no wherewithal to actually how to engage in that. And I can't be conflict averse. I have to believe it's worth fighting through it to get to a place where we can connect, right? That's number one. And that means it'll be some battle scars in the process, but you get better at it over time. But the most important thing I found is that we have to be able to do it with humility. So I think the bigger issue in most instances is how we respond. How we respond when we feel like, when we take offense, when we feel like somebody has challenged our faith. And so I'm not perfect at it, but I think the ability to, as they say, have our words be seasoned with grace, right? If I can, in a sense, take sometimes even what might be a verbal assault and remain true to the same values that I've professed, I've seen in many situations that turn it. So it is a great question that you have. The last thing I would say is the way that I think about it, the last part of your question, that we do it in a broader community, I don't, under the auspice of my role at Northern Trust, right, try to impress, in a sense, my beliefs or views on clients. But here's one thing I do. I am very involved in all the communities that I'm connected to. And that involvement creates many opportunities for me to speak and share and engage with people about the beliefs. So I think that creates opportunities in various different environments to engage in those kind of dialogues.
Thank you for your comments. Donna Carroll from Dominican University.
Hello, Donna.
So there's father of vocation, Frederick Buechner, always says, you know, vocation is where your passion meets the world's greatest need. That's fairly easy to translate if you're in the social services or the not-for-profits. Talk to me or talk to us about how you do that yourself in the for-profit sector, and perhaps how you give the people that report to you permission, or what I might say to a student who wants to be at Northern Trust versus, you know, Thrive Social Service Agency.
So I think this is a great question, because I think particularly for people who are religious, we've created a dichotomy that I'm not sure that should exist. So we say either explicitly or implicitly that some work is sacred and then a lot of work is not. Some work is good and some work is not. And I just go back to, I think work is inherently good. If you're not doing anything that's criminal, right, it's good work, right? So I think I think what we do in well-meaning is we give people bad instruction. We say, go find the specific work that is going to bring your heart joy. And I tell people, here's what I think. Find joy in the work that you're doing. I think every single one of us that will go back today, if we choose to, can find redeeming value in the work that we do. And so actually what I spend more time talking to people about, like especially when they're asking for coaching and development, I say, what do you enjoy to do? What do you like about what you do? So let's talk about shaping your job into what you want to do. Now, you're going to have some minimum proficiency of stuff you have to do, but if people are honest, especially knowledge workers, if we're, as knowledge workers, people who work in like services industries, for the most part, your proverbial boss doesn't even know what you do. They have no idea how you spend your day. They don't. How many people work at a place where they make you, like, they come up with expectations for you? The managers don't even write them half the time. Like, you can write your own. Like, if you just do it before, I don't have. My point is,
IFYC, I know what they do.
My point is, people have much more influence on how they experience their day than we give them license to. Now, again, I don't have a Pollyanna view of the world. There's certainly some bad environments to work for and some bad managers to work up under. And if you're in that situation, leave. That's the only piece of practical advice. But the vast majority of people is not that. But I actually think we would help people more, instead of telling them there's some mythical perfect job for them, actually getting them to really find, in a sense, fulfillment in whatever state they presently find themselves in.
You say up front, and I love this about the book, right? This is about your attitude, right? And actually, if you change your attitude, you have a much better chance of changing the environment, right? I love that. We have time for one or two more. Yes, in the back.
All right, so hypothetically, I'm sitting at my cubicle, I created bad relationships. I'm reading the book. I am so excited. I'm finding joy in the joy of reading the book. I created these bad relationships. I'm excited to find the joy in my vocation. I don't have an education. I have bad credit, okay? But I have a lot of ideas, okay? Now, I'm excited. Where do I start?
Right. So I think, so it's a great question, right? Because again, like some of us, by virtue of whatever set of circumstances that brought you into this world and that you were born into, we have a better set of opportunities, like from an occupation standpoint or educational standpoint than others. And that's why I think you have to step back from that. So to your question, right, it starts with wherever you are. I always have a conversation with people. Just thought experience. What do you enjoy about what you do? And if you talk to people long enough, you can find things that they enjoy about what they do. And I think the important thing is to start and build from there. You know, one of the worst pieces of advice I think to give people, when somebody's unhappy in their present job, just to tell them to leave with no other exploration is actually bad advice. Because oftentimes they're running from something and not to something. And so what happens is, in the exploration of finding wherever they are, the bit of joy that they have, two things happen. One, their attitude and perspective starts to change. Because the one incredible thing that we have as human beings is the power of the human spirit. We literally, I can change my day tomorrow by changing the way that I think, right? Now, once you do that, the second part of the question is, then you can begin to ask those higher order questions. Are there things that I need to do to change my set of opportunities? Do I want to pursue further education? Might I want to pursue another opportunity in this firm or whatever? But until you figured out how to find joy in the situation that you're in, you're not going to run to the next one and find it. And I think that's really important, to be able to engage people there and help in that kind of way.
You change your attitude, you have a better chance of changing your environment. This has been special. I'm thinking of two of my favorite quotes, which for me kind of crystallize some of the themes of our conversation. One is from the first cut off of Mos Def's album, Black on Both Sides. It's a song called Fear Not of Man, where he says, you're not valuable because you're beautiful. You're not valuable because you got a whole lot of money. You're valuable because God created you. Now, whether you realize that or not, that's your issue, right? But objective truth, you are valuable because God created you, right? And the second is a line from the poet June Jordan, who, in reference to the way you wove together, what does it mean to be a stranger? What does it mean to be in dialogue? What does it mean to be in relationship? What does it mean to live in a world full of meaning? She's got this beautiful line where she says, I am a stranger learning how to worship the strangers around me, right? So thank you for your sacred dialogue. Thank you for inviting us into your conversation. Thank you for the light that you shine. Thank you for your friendship.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Banut. I have the honor of being the Senior Vice President at Interfaith Youth Corps and the daunting task of following those two up. So thank you so much for an engaging and enriching conversation. I can't actually deliver on that task by myself, but I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Donna Carroll, who is a board member at Interfaith Youth Corps and the president of Dominican University. Two phrases really elevate in my mind that you both mentioned. And Shundrawn, you talked about a community of strangers and how we don't want our social worlds to be, whether it's the workplace or the campus, a community of strangers, and the importance and centrality of citizenship. And I think those two notions really animate so much about what IFYC is about. Nothing really expresses that as well as the work of our campus partners. So I'm going to invite Donna to say a word or two about Dominican University.
Thank you, Tony, and what a great talk. So it's a pleasure for me to be here and be part of the IFYC family and to participate in this forum. I was joking with Tony, in the maturity of my presidency, I'm in my 26th year as president. I often talk about how the alignment of institutional mission and personal vocation creates not only joy, but also leadership resilience. And so I'm particularly delighted to be part of this particular forum because it's very meaningful to me. So as Tony noted, I have a deep personal commitment to the work of Interfaith Youth Corps, in part rooted in my own Catholic faith. And I'm proud that Dominican has been a part of the IFYC movement since the beginning, ensuring that interfaith dialogue is a curricular as well as a co-curricular imperative. I was thinking that rather than give you a laundry list of the successful university initiatives, let me briefly just touch on 2 points that I think have been transformational in Dominican's relationship with IFYC. Because all of us here in this room are IFYC stakeholders, and impact is that important variable for all of us. So, number one, at a time when Catholic higher education was challenged with some canonical constraints, those of you who live in the Catholic community, of a Vatican document called Ex Cordia Ecclesia, Eboo remembers this, it was Dominican's public commitment to interfaith dialogue that gave our faculty of other faiths and no faith a sense of community and belonging. That was a bridge of goodwill at the time for which I will always be grateful, and I believe deeply retained our faculty. On a more practical note, not surprisingly for all of you who work in higher education, it's more challenging, or it was more challenging, to incorporate interfaith dialogue in the graduate professional curriculum than it was at the undergraduate level. That was until our Dean of the School of Social Work realized that the ability to relate to clients authentically, clients of different faiths, was a career competency in a very practical way. And in fact, it was a competency that met the requirements of the Council of Social Work Education for accreditation. That flipped the conversation. Whereas on the undergraduate, it was formative and educational. At the graduate level, the fact that it was practical and met a concrete competency made all the difference. And over time, that has been the same issue across all of our professional programs. You are a better professional if you have an interfaith skill working in a pluralistic environment and a complicated business. So today, in our maturity as an FYC model campus, through our interfaith committee, we continue to challenge ourselves to deepen and refresh our commitment to interfaith work. As one final example, let me brag a bit about our online course, Introduction to Interfaith Leadership, which was designed in conjunction with IFYC. That course is being offered in a new dual delivery modality this year for enrichment to adult learners through our Siena Center, in fact, adult learners all over the world, and at the same time, it's an undergraduate course for credit. And the lively exchange between those undergraduate students and adult learners from all over the place has been very, very productive. And in fact, I like to think this is one more example of how Dominican continues to be an IFYC ambassador. So thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Donna, and thank you for your wonderful work at Dominican University. As many of you know, and some of you might not know, the team at Interfaith Youth Corps is in partnership with north of 500 colleges and universities, coast to coast, Many of them are not quite as exemplary as Dominican University, but our vision is that higher ed wholesale will exhibit deep commitments to advancing interfaith cooperation. We think that breaks the danger of a community of strangers, both in higher ed and broadly in American civic public life. We think that advances citizenship in a fundamental way, especially as all of us are citizens in a religiously diverse democracy. We are Chicago-based. We are happy to do this event annually as our contribution to our hometown. We don't ask for anything in return. There is a copy of Shundrawn's excellent book at your table for you to take home. Within it, you will notice that there is also this beautiful-looking bookmark. And Shundrawn's written word is as compelling as a spoken word. I'm pretty confident that you will read this book in one sitting, making the bookmark function of this card entirely superfluous. And you might then notice, when you flip it around, it doubles as a pledge card. And if you feel so moved and inspired and wish to support our work, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming out today, and thank you for joining us. Many thanks to Shundrawn.